So I guess my enthusiasm, and this is a bit of a paradox, is ambivalence. And I love to be, because I don't know if you find this, but whenever I have strong opinions, but then they're totally counteracted by other strong opinions which come along. Because as soon as you state something, I think this is built into language, and probably Derrida wrote about it somewhere, but I don't know. As soon as you state something, it becomes false because of all the things it excludes. And then the opposite statement kind of becomes true, but then the opposite statement is also false, and so on and so on. So anyway, I wanted to give you a little time capsule of my ambivalent reaction to the idea which Alex Fleetwood originally proposed to me. Well, I guess Alex wrote to me in when was this? 2008? Yeah, and I'd never heard of pervasive. Actually, that's another question we should put up there. Could there be perversive urban gaming? Yeah, let's try. Pervasive urban gaming, or PUG, because previously for me a pug was a little dog with a flat face. And in fact, I used to play a game with pugs when I was a kid. I used to, there was a dog aid society next to our house in Edinburgh, and we would cover these well shafts with little twigs and grasses, hoping the pugs would fall in, but they never did, which kind of shows that there can be a malicious urban gaming too. So anyway, I wrote this piece called on my blog, which I no longer do because blogging is dead and over. Pervasive urban gaming, count me in and out, or count me out and in. Eventually I was counted in because I did a performance on the South Bank in 2008, so I was very easily won over. But I think this is kind of an interesting time capsule, so I'm just going to read through it quite quickly. It starts with this picture of me and my girlfriend playing around with plushy toys, saying, while the less fortunate were working in offices, yesterday Hisai and I were shopping for antler plushy hats and giant koalas. Our ludic credentials and annoying privilege established, I can now proceed with today's serious business. So then I talk about Alex contacting me to be involved in the Hide and Seek Festival. So I watched the documentary online which I found about this festival, this was my reaction to it. There was a thing in the blurb about pervasive games transform the city into a playground, make your heart race, change the way you see the world, and get you playing nicely with others. That nicely is kind of important. Hide and Seek isn't the only pug festival. We're talking about other festivals. There's one in Amsterdam, or there was in 2008. So this has to do with taking computer gaming experience. The first thing I thought was it's something to do with digitization of daily life and heads-up displays, and we'll all have eye patches soon, one of which will be connected permanently to some sort of database. I was a bit unsure, and I thought of MTV's Jackass show also, the ludicrization, do you call it, of everyday life. But I was a little bit worried that this would, because I don't like listening to iPods, for instance, because it cuts me off from the so-called real world and the physical environment. So I was a bit worried about that, and I started thinking about Peter Sellers and being there. But then I thought, what happens when you turn a city into a playground? And in the Middle Ages, of course, you had mob football in British towns, which was this incredibly savage game of football with a sort of medicine ball filled with stones. And there were the only rule was you had to get the ball to a particular place, like the Mercat Cross or whatever it was. And it was a bit like last night. If anybody was at Trafalgar Square last night when the Spanish won, there was this kind of real, quite scary atmosphere. If you weren't going in the same direction as these fans, or if you weren't a Spain fan or whatever, there was a sense of that medieval anarchy mixed with carnival. So, it kind of borders on chaos and can be scary. So at that point I'm saying count me out, because I don't want, there was a quote, these games were played between neighboring towns and villages involving an unlimited number of players on opposing teams who would clash in a heaving mass of people struggling to move an item such as an inflated pig's bladder to particular geographical points, such as their opponent's church. Count me out of that, please. Sort of physically quite frail. And yet, count me in, because isn't this everything cool about the future as well as everything appalling about the past? Isn't this flash mobs and situationism, Certo and homo ludens, and the thing we do when we've scaled the very pinnacle of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is replacing the work ethic, which is all about necessity, with the higher, in Maslow's model, it's like self-actualization and self-expression, which is at the very top. So who wouldn't want that? And yet, the dialectic swings back. Isn't this everything terrible about the present as well? Isn't this the compulsory fun of management training weekends that break the ice? and get you out of your shell to bond as a team. Isn't this enforced audience participation, repressive desublimation, in the phrase of Herbert Marcuse, a Butlin's Redcoat holiday organized by Nathan Barley and his huge team of kidult assistants? And I think I actually...
The phrase just stayed with me.
Well, it sounds like Santa Claus with his dwarves or whatever. Is it Santa Claus who has dwarves? I think there's actually a Nathan Barley video somewhere here, but yeah, online Russian tramp racing, it's probably it's been removed as terms of use violation. But Nathan Barley very nicely observed the idea that when there's a mixed environment like a bus, Nathan is there with a miniature stunt bicycle and he's sort of beating out rhythms and improvising raps. He's very expressive amongst people who are actually not able to be expressive or don't want to be expressive or are just going to work or whatever. And I thought that was a very good critique of, because there were some elements in the videos I saw for the 2008 Hide and Seek Festival where people were in Soho looking at a real homeless man who had bare feet and saying, oh, this guy, he's from a game of Tetris or something, and he's been shot. You know, they were turning everything, but this turned out to be part of an elaborate scenario where two teams had been pitted against each other and were simply role-playing. So, okay, that was kind of covered, that one of these teams was kind of evil and the other was ethical. So, you know, I felt, well, this is disrespectful in Nathan Barley-esque way, but also it turned out to be a larger scenario. So, how pervasive does pervasive urban gaming have to become? So pervasive it not only invades the city, but penetrates and pervades the shields we all raise in the city to protect ourselves and our different ways of living. Because a city is the kivis, it exists because we hide our differences from other people to a certain extent out of consideration. And it's funny, online people are much more revealing and they're much more in niches and they can be expressive in different ways. So I think that's a difference. That in the city you kind of want to have the right to keep yourself to yourself and not to participate in everything. Yeah, several paragraphs about Nathan Barley in here, so I'll skip those because it's not 2005 anymore. But I think it's very interesting that Phil has Plymouth Brethren relatives, because I do as well, and I think often some of these sort of critiques come out of a sense of the inherent evil in things, which is a very Calvinist reaction. Maybe Pat as well. You're Catholic. Catholic Calvinist. Okay.
Heading towards Buddhism.
Heading towards Buddhism. Okay. Yeah, well, there's paragraphs and paragraphs of this, but I just really wanted to summarize it. And I guess we will embody this ambivalence amongst ourselves for the rest of the time. Thank you very much.